Okay, here's something that really is very worrying. I think we should all be worried about this. It's the rise, in my view anyway, the rise of the far right. The far right all over the world seems to be getting some kind of, I don't know, some sort of renaissance.
Rearing their ugly heads.
Rearing their very ugly heads. Nationalism seems to be coming back to the fore. The far right Vox party has taken 12 seats in the Andalusian regional election on Sunday, becoming the first group to get such a triumph at the ballot box since Spain's return to democracy after the death of Franco in 1975. So I wonder what it is about the far right that now seems to be appealing to a lot of people. Sophia Gaston is the Deputy Director of the Henry Jackson Society, or Sophia, I should say, an expert on the rise of the far right. Sophia, good evening. Thank you for joining. Is it good evening or good afternoon?
Afternoon now, still, isn't it?
It's dark, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a bit like
it's still afternoon.
Shall we say it's afternoon?
Yes.
Let's agree it's afternoon. Sophia, tell me why you think this is. Are we becoming more nationalistic, or a lot of people becoming more nationalistic as time goes on for some reason?
Well, I think that Spain has long been quite a confounding exception to the rule on the rise of right-wing populism in Europe over recent years. I mean, it was hit very hard by the financial crisis, and it has some of the highest levels of immigration in the EU. But all of its populism has really come from the left most recently. And I think a lot of this has come from the long tail of the legacy of Franco's rule. It's really turned people away from anything that sort of even smells like fascism. But I think in recent years, as dysfunction has grown in the political system, and all sorts of separatist movements have commanded greater power and influence, I think a new space has opened up for a party sort of promising a more kind of centralized, stable form of rule under a common Spanish identity. And that's something that we haven't seen in Spain for a while. We've seen these Catalonian independence movements. They've really catalyzed a kind of north-south divide, fueled a kind of reactive unionist movement. And also, I think immigration has really played a role here in Spain. I mean, Spain has, as I said, had very high rates of immigration for some time, particularly from Morocco and Romania, even in the midst of a terrible economic situation. But it's now really also on the front line of all the migrants that are crossing the Mediterranean. I mean, I think it's more than 50,000 migrants have arrived there this year alone.
How far is this going to go? Do you think that the expat Brits who quite often live in their own communities in Spain, do you think they're going to have to start worrying about whether or not they have a future there?
Well, I think Brexit may give some of the expats in Spain more cause to worry than the rise of nationalism in the first instance. But I do think it is an interesting trend here in Spain, because we've had quite a few decades, really, of Spain sort of moving to a really fragmented system. And there's been a lot of dysfunction and chaos in politics. I mean, on a national level, of course, there's a new prime minister in power just for the past 6 months after the previous government was forced to sort of collapse after a corruption scandal. So I think people are really tired of chaos, and as we've seen in other parts of Europe, that quest for a sort of nationalism and a cohesive identity seems to really be coming as a reaction to a lot of people just feeling very exasperated with what's going on in politics, in the sense that maybe nothing's getting done.
Well, let's talk about that a little more, not just in Spain, but perhaps the rise of UKIP in this country, although not extreme right-wing, although some people might say it's become that now. Donald Trump being elected in America, a lot of people think that is because of the extreme right-wing over there as well. Why? Is it because people feel hard done by?
I think that there is a really complex interplay of different types of insecurity, so economic insecurity, but also social insecurity and cultural, of course, as well. I think demographics are changing, technology is changing, the shape of the economy is changing. And I think a lot of people, frankly, aren't too happy with the kind of place we've come to in terms of the political settlement, the economic settlement. I think they feel that maybe there's something broken in the contract that you're meant to have between citizens and your representatives.
But becoming extremely right-wing isn't really going to mend it. I mean, we've got history to look back on. Look what happened when the Nazis rose to prominence in Germany. I mean, are people really... Is it because people don't remember that? By and large, most of the people now are too young to remember that sort of thing?
Well, I think it's interesting if you go back to Spain, and as I say, Franco's legacy, I think there has really kept right-wing populism away for a lot longer than it has in other parts of Europe. But I think for the younger generations now, that legacy is not something they've really grown up with personal experience of. There's a lot of sort of disputing history now. And I think even those who lived through this time, they may look at what they see today and start to become a bit nostalgic for a time when things perhaps maybe felt more constrained but more certain.
But things
a lot of people are very fearful at the moment.
Things have been bad for like 10 years, so people are getting sick of the politicians, and that's why Trump's got in and people voted Brexit. And isn't that what's going on? People are fed up with the ruling classes.
I think people are definitely looking outside of the traditional classes of politics and thinking maybe we need some voices from the outside to sort of rattle the cage. I think also it is true that until the centre ground parties can find a way to respond to people's very genuine concerns about immigration, about demographic change, the future of the nation state, about culture, values and traditions, I think they're going to really find themselves on the back foot to right-wing populist parties.
But is the right-wing populist parties don't, I'm glad to say, seem to appeal to a lot of younger people. They seem to appeal to sort of middle-aged and older people, don't they? Maybe the next generation will be able to deal with it.
Well, I think it is absolutely true that we are seeing a sort of the rise of a very progressive younger generation who've grown up with all of these advances in social liberalism that we've seen over the past 20 years just sort of being settled and commonplace. I would say as well, though, there are some elements of the younger generation that are becoming a bit more susceptible to these sort of right-wing narratives. I mean, Marine Le Pen, she certainly has been able to command quite a prominent section of young people in her supporter base. I think a lot of this is as well, especially for the millennial generation. A lot of these people graduated into the height of the financial crisis, and I think they are dissatisfied and disbelieving in the traditional politicians as well. And they look ahead to things like, for example, paying into their pensions and a welfare system, and they think, well, am I really going to benefit from this? So I think there is a sense of intergenerational warfare as well that will be playing out over the coming years.
So they've got no stake in the system, so they're sort of just having a go at it whatever way they can.
Well, I think there is a huge appetite for risk-taking and for change right across populations, and whether that's the young and the old. Sometimes those appetites are moving in the opposite directions. So you see the young pit against the old. Certainly, I think in America we're seeing a lot of that in the sort of Trump and anti-Trump and anti-Trump movements. But elsewhere in Europe, I think sometimes you actually see the young coming together with the old. And different coalitions. I think it's important to remember that these right-wing populist parties are also nationalist socialist parties in many ways. A lot of them are very economically interventionist. So sometimes people vote for them because of their policies on immigration, but sometimes for their policies on the welfare state.
One last question, Sophia. Do you think there is now a serious, palpable chance maybe of another Hitler finding a power base somewhere in the world?
Well, I think that we have to be very careful about where all this mistrust in government is taking us. I think there is a huge urgency for the traditional parties to really accept that a step change is needed. It's going to take a lot of courage. But if we are complacent, I think absolutely we have to be prepared that things can change quickly. You only have to look at what's happened in Hungary, for example, to see where even a member state of the EU can move very quickly from a liberal to illiberal democracy right before our eyes.
All right. Sophia, thank you very much indeed. Sophia Gaston, Deputy Director of the Henry Jackson Society. Why, after all the things that have happened in the world, would a far-right political ideal appeal to anyone? I mean, when you look back in history and you see some of the things that the far right have been guilty of, when you see the things that far right supporters think they don't like people who are foreign or of different skin colours or ethnicities, if you prefer the word, what is it? And they're very ugly people. I'm not talking about the way they look, although that, unfortunately,
it does correlate, though, if you actually see them.
Well, yes, you're right, it does. But it's rather annoying when I have a sort of hairstyle that is sometimes considered to be that of a right-wing
I mean,
person.
you could easily, yeah.
Which is annoying, to say the least. So what is it? Is there anybody here who feels that national, all this, I'm proud of the flag, I'm proud of the country? Great, of course, we're all proud of where we live and what it does, but we're not proud, hopefully, to the exception of other nations. We don't want to go on. I think the worst thing, and you can call me and tell me about this, I think the worst thing about this country is the fact that it insists on having the word great in front of its name. I never use Great Britain.
Well, not anymore, but soon to be again, Great Britain, yeah.
Ignore him, he doesn't vote in any election.
Yeah, I can't,
The United Kingdom, if we are a united kingdom, and I'm not really sure that we are, because listen, if we're gonna vote to leave the European Union, then we don't need to hang on to Gibraltar. And quite frankly, why do we need a united kingdom?
Yeah,
we might as well go our
away.
separate ways.
We're going to sell Gibraltar. How much is it worth?
Okay, well, if you can answer any of those questions, and if you do share some of the sympathies of the extreme right, I won't shout at you. I won't laugh at you. I will let you come on the programme and put your point of view. And who knows? I mean, that you might be sensible. You might, in the same way that I have yet to find a sensible argument for Brexit. You're more than welcome to try and put it.